Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode number 148 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like great food to bring people together. Go and check out the new book that we released a month ago. It's called From Letters to Leaders, Creating Impact on Your College Campus and Beyond. Go check that out on Amazon today. Now, on our show today, we have an amazing treat for all of our listeners. You get a 2-for-1 on today's show. We have with us two incredible advocates for the fraternity and sorority community. First up, we have Dr. Steve Veldkamp. He is the director of the Timothy J. Piazza Center for Fraternity and Sorority Research and Reform. In his role, Steve organizes fundraising priorities and supports unit fundraising initiatives. Additionally, as the executive director of the Piazza Center, he sets a national research agenda and works with research faculty in designing, conducting, sourcing, and resourcing exploratory research to benefit more than 770 campuses that host fraternities and sororities nationwide. He's also a frequent campus and headquarter consultant, and he's a national conference presenter on fraternity and sorority life. We also have with us a guest who is very familiar to the Fraternity Foodie Podcast listening audience, Dr. Pietro Sasso. Dr. Sasso serves as the faculty research fellow for the center, in which he supports the dissemination of interdisciplinary research projects as scholarly peer-reviewed journals and presentations at national conferences. He has previously worked as a fraternity and sorority professional in both inter and international campus-based professional capacities. He is currently a faculty member of Higher Education and Student Affairs, in which he has written and edited more than 15 publications related to the fraternity and sorority experience, including 2 seminal texts. In total, he has co-edited 8 textbooks, authored approximately 50 scholarly publications, and he's facilitated over 50 conference presentations. Wow, what a treat we have for the guest today. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Hello.
It is great to have you on. Thank you both so much. And, I have a bunch of questions here that our audience was curious about. So let's just jump right straight into the questions. The Timothy J. Piazza Center for Fraternity and Sorority Research and Reform was formed at Penn State in January 2019. So we're wondering, what was the reason for bringing it to Penn State and then building on that legacy that actually started at IU Bloomington back in 1979, which at the time was the Center for Fraternity and Sorority Research?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Like I like to say, it is an old soul and a new center, and built on the shoulder of giants. A lot of the higher ed greats, Bob Schaefer in particular, the Schaefer Award and the Association for Fraternity and Sorority Advisors, and a Schaefer Award in a lot of different places. Juggernaut in the field of student affairs. That it was one of his brainchild that the center exists, right? And some other thoughtful leaders, Sigma Nu's leader that was also happened to be the chancellor of Indiana University. So a lot of greats really inspired the center to become a reality in the mid 70s to the late 70s. It actually was born out of a national conversation about the state of the American college fraternity in 1974 and 75, and then founded later on. So old soul, new center. So the new center and the story behind it really was one of administrators after the tragedy of Tim's passing, and administrators looking to a president talking to other presidents, a vice president talking to other vice presidents, and saying, "Hey, what do we do to really move the needle in creating positive change?" And not having many answers, and so. I was brought in to the conversation and convinced a vice president who convinced a president who convinced 34 trustees unanimously to vote, and then also to entice the center to move. We were a 501c3, so we actually had that capability, a little different in terms of how we were constructed, and that's why we were able to pick up and move to Penn State. So that's the story. It was really to in earnest, and as I like to say, the humility that an institution says that we don't have all the answers, but we're a research institution, a land grant institution, and we're gonna find those answers out and then share them broadly. So it was done with humility, done for, I would say, the absolutely right reasons. And then I could add on, Michael, and please, Pietro, jump in at any point. But I think the other advantage of the pop-up, and I just was talking to an exec about this moments ago, is that I didn't expect that the relationships I have with other research centers at Penn State, it's pretty phenomenal and very much an open door. And so there's a lot of great collaboration at Penn State, as well as with researchers across the US. So yeah, thank you.
That's fantastic. Really, really good. Now, I think, you know, your approach is right. You know, we do have to approach this with humility. And I think you're right. We don't know a lot. And I guess I'm wondering what makes the Piazza Center different about their approach to actually shifting student behavior, which we've been trying for a while now.
Yeah. Well, so we'd like to say safe and extraordinary, right? So I think on the safety part, that's a lot to do with applying what we already know from prevention and intervention science. NIAAA, AFA just did a webinar yesterday with Jason Kilmer. Actually, I just got off the phone with Jason Kilmer about an hour ago. He's helping with one of our new studies. Pietro, you just learned that for their first moment there. But in talking to Dr. Kilmer about our work and what we're best positioned to do, there's a lot we already know. It just hasn't been applied to fraternity sorority context. And as a campus-based professional for years, and I know a lot of campus-based Greek advisors out there, that you get told or you react to an incident. And so you're rowing in a direction, you're doing good work, and then all of a sudden you need to add to that work or drop that work and do something else. And it seems like we can't hold more than one conversation at a time, right? So we're doing hazing prevention, and then we switch to sexual violence prevention, and then switch to leadership development or whatever it might be. And so I think something, Michael, that we've been talking about, and Dr. Sasso and I have been talking quite a bit about, is how do we hold folks' attention in the research, the conversation we're having with prevention scientists, specifically like a Jason Kilmer is, can we apply the right amount of dosage of medicine to the issues? And we seemingly cannot do that right now. So I think that's one of the things we're in the best position to do, to say, we know a lot of things, they need to be applied to the fraternity sorority context. And then we need to, so apply literature that we already know, test it, and then create, I would say, new formulas for ways we practice prevention science within the context of fraternity sorority life. So that's on the safety side. On the extraordinary side, there's a little bit more flexibility with that, but it's learning pedagogy, it's co-curricular learning work, it's investing in integrative learning and problem solving and teamwork and the concepts of leadership and character development that we could also borrow from. There's a lot of stuff written on that. The Dalton Institute on Character Development at Florida State. Looking forward to partnering in a whole host of conversations when we can build our bandwidth. We're still standing up the center, right? So we're not fully resourced to be able to do everything that we want to do. But we're going to get there. And so building relationships with research faculty that want to do the extraordinary side, the transformative leadership side, building relationships with our research faculty that want to apply and the prevention and intervention science work to get us to safe, and then build out extraordinary. So.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. I like hearing all of that. I love that you're working with other departments there at Penn State. Certainly for me at MTSU, working with, you know, Data Science Institute and all these other people that have access to a lot of other things. I think you're absolutely right. We can make it all relevant to fraternity and sorority life. That's really good. Now, the other thing is, recently, the Piazza Center and the National Panhellenic Conference, or NPC, they announced the launch of 2 companion research studies that will evaluate cultural competency and diversity, equity, and inclusion within the NPC affiliated sorority chapters. I'm wondering, how will this research help in evaluating all of these current initiatives that NPC is working on, and how is that ultimately going to help us drive change?
Yeah. So, Michael, I would say that the studies, well, one detail about the studies is we're actually studying diversity, equity, inclusion, and then evaluating whether the students, how the chapters impact on cultural competency, cultural humility. And so as we work to slightly different than what we said in the news release, but that's what we're getting towards. There's nothing in the literature about the sorority experience. Well, I should say nothing. In terms of the NPC organizations, this is an exploratory work. So we're really listening to what the students have to say is their experience, right? So I would say we're not evaluating programs. We're listening to the students. We're creating a repository of data, a qualitative data that can be mined by different research faculty, so they can come back to this research, similar to, if folks are in the higher ed research world, the Wabash study. So it'll form a really great, like I said, database data that remind and remind and remind for some different things. What we're ideally going to position this as, from the stories that we listen to, so from the myth-busting stories that there are NPC organizations that are approaching 25% diversity. So it's not just a token membership, but we're looking at more diverse racial and ethnic diversity. What happened? Was it an advisor? Was it the students themselves? Was it a headquarters program? Was it a campus-based program that really inspired them to lean into to diversity, equity, inclusion? And then we're going to mine it for some other things, like I said, lenses of cultural competency or lenses of cultural humility, to really tease some of that out. So a lot of focus groups, a lot of interviews that will do that work. And that is with Dr. Georgiana Martin at University of Georgia. And we hope to be data collecting this summer and then doing some of that analysis in the early fall. So
that's wonderful. I'm so glad that you're working on this. I have to tell you, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the changing demographics that we're seeing on college campuses. I think a lot of it has to do with current events and what we're seeing in the news. But I'm here for it. I mean, I am here for it. I'm ready for it. And I'm so excited to see this happening. This collaboration sounds great.
I just talked just about one of the studies. The other study is looking at where NPC organizations are at minority serving institutions. And so I failed to highlight that study in terms of also what is the student experience at those institutions, and is the institution culture and mission really driving what then membership looks like. And so kind of teasing that out as well. So that's where the companion studies, in terms of looking at it at the different forms of institutions, how institutions are a part of that conversation, as well as the national organizations, international organizations in that conversations, and the students. And again, what's driving that change. And I think the benefit, and again, the Piazza Center getting back to professional practice, is what are those kernels of wisdom that we can learn from students to help arm the campus professional with really critical information, and the headquarters professional on, hey, this is what I need. This is what I need for support. This would have been really helpful if I had this, or this is what really actually helped drive that change. And then for other organizations to learn from that and potentially implement it in their game plan. So.
Very cool. The other partnership that I wanted to talk about is the one that you have with the Association of Fraternity and Sorority Advisors, also known as AFA, and the Post-Secondary Education Research Center, which is at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. You're now studying the effects of staffing practices in offices of fraternity and sorority life on individual chapter and also community outcomes. So tell us, how does staffing size and structure impact the chapter experience?
Well, we're getting to that. So exploratory work, so what I would say is, I frame this study as there's glimmers in the pan if we're mining for gold here, and we need to do a little bit more digging and to hang our hats on some things. But what it's starting to, the initial work that we've done does suggest that a larger staff has an impact and a correlation with more accountability. And then the level of the staff. So something we didn't initially think we were going to explore, but as we're closer proximity to reporting to a vice president based on titles, we're seeing also an increase in grades and GPAs. There was a lot of other indications that there's a lot of other correlations that we could hang our hats on, but the data, the pool of data needs to be a little larger. Specifically, and if I can put a plug in here for the National Fraternity Sorority Scorecard, we need more scorecard participants and campuses to send us that data that you potentially already have on your website, because it's mostly publicly available data, sent to us so we can increase the numbers and ideally replicate that, and then talk to the leadership of AFA and Dyad that there's maybe some other ways we can approach it. Jason Bergeron has some really great ideas in terms of more from a member perspective than just even the chapter perspective, and how to build out another companion study to really try to get towards the model and the staffing model, and then again the outcomes there. But to wrap that up, I would say really good indications that we're on the right track. We need to do more work. So in the early indication says there are some positive correlations, which that's what common sense would say, right? That staffing models do have an important part to play in those outcomes. So.
Well, this is great news for fraternity and sorority advisors around the country, because they're going to take that report and try to do everything they can to beef up their departments, and they sure could use the help, I'll tell you that. Yeah. So that's wonderful news to hear that you're working on it. So Pietro, tell us, I mean, you're now the inaugural research fellow, which of course is an outstanding choice because of our friendship, of course, but what kind of tasks are you going to be working on for the center?
Well, Steve has me working on a number of projects. It seems to grow and shift and expand in some really exciting ways. We're exploring a range of studies. I think the first one, a long-term project, we're looking at the relationship between hazing and alcohol use. There's a lot of research that suggests it might be related, but we don't significantly. We have this idea of forced alcohol consumption as a form of hazing, right? But we don't have specific, or it's a practice of hazing, but we don't have a lot of, there's not a way to predict alcohol use to hazing, right? And we know from, professional evidence and anecdotes and some of Hank Newer's work that alcohol is involved in most hazing incidences, as well as Alan's work talks about it as a form of hazing. Mm-hmm. And we know that, the more you actually drink in high school is tied to higher levels of actually drinking in undergrad too, right? Which might be related to hazing. So we have a lot of environmental concepts and this like constellation of possibilities, but we don't have anything to really tie it together. And so this is where we're kind of looking into this, and we're partnering with UVA and Cal Poly to explore this. And so there's some projects that are evolving around that. I think long-term that's exciting. And then also looking at student conduct models and hazing investigations. We're working with the Association of Student Conduct Administrators, ASCA, to do a national project and looking at and trying to really, I think, tease out models that people are using in practice. I think it's very informal right now. And so we're going to do a exploratory study to think up a like typology, right? Or a map of these models that are being used in the field. And then we're going to long-term, I think, investigate efficacy across these models. And then, we're also exploring other studies around anti-Semitism, around student identity. I think the Piazza Center has so many ongoing projects that it's really exciting. So there's somewhere, I think, Steve, between 10 and 15 that are beginning this semester, or will get started, I think, in the next probably semester or so. So I think long-term, the center is a really exciting place to be. And then we're just launching our scholars program. So we'll be picking 3 to 5 scholars to work on some sponsored projects. And that'll be exciting too, because that will increase our reach, our capacity, and I'll be mentoring some of those. And so that's a highly scaffolded, I think, mentoring experience for all these, scholar practitioners or practitioner scholars that want to do more research and want to know what it's like to work on a full research study, right? On like a research team. What's great about the Piazza Center is it functions like a true research center. There are research teams. And then, I think I forgot the other study, Steve. We are working on a hazing study that will look at early identifiers, right? So what are the early warning signs around hazing? We have a lot of like ex post facto or like after the incident, like this is what we think happened, or Hank Newer's work or Madden's work tells us what happened after the fact, right? Mm-hmm. And so we don't have any predictors. And so we'll be doing a number of focus groups to look at what are the warning signs that people look for. And so that's a larger exploratory study that will help us identify warning signs. Mm-hmm. And so that can inform interventions and approaches and like a checklist, right? Like these are things you should be looking for. So I think practice-wise, that can have a huge impact on our field. So I think there's just a lot of exciting things happening at the center, and I'm excited to be a part of it. And thank you, Steve, for all of your help in actually like starting to launch this.
This is
He's saying thank you now, Michael, but when I come up with the idea of the week and I come back Dr. Sasso, I'm like, we have another idea to explore. Yeah. So
this is so exciting. As far as predictors go, definitely look into GPA. I think that's something that needs to be looked mm-hmm. at and researched, because I think that could be one of the keys in terms of trying to get a predictor before the hazing happens. And obviously, we have a whole host of hazing incidents to look at and a whole host of data to actually just rewind one semester and see if we see a precipitous drop in GPA for the chapter or for new members. And maybe that is a warning sign, but something to look at.
I think Michael maybe wants to help out with our study.
I do. I'm so jealous.
I think Michael can be one of our scholars. Yeah, he can run all of our focus groups. You have a wonderful radio voice. You'd be the best group like monitor for all of our focus groups.
We could turn this into an interview easily, Michael.
Yeah. I like your idea about GPA. I want to talk a little bit about that for 1 second. There's some really institutional data, I think, from most colleges that would suggest that you see a slow decline, right? So it's not necessarily one semester, but it's probably over several academic years. And so you can, if you map that out over several academic semesters, that's possible that we can, I think, understand at what point does, what is the point of origin, right? When we see that drop. And so I think GPA is an early warning sign, absolutely, but it's a longer term symptom, right? That we should be looking at around interventions. And so there's some early research that came out in the 90s, early 2000s that says that especially when fraternity men join, their GPA will drop like 0.3 to 0.5, somewhere in that range. And that is recovered over time. So going Greek, right? Like it doesn't necessarily impact your GPA. It doesn't hurt it, but it will that first like semester that you affiliate, right? And there's been no recent data to support that's changed, right? That's a study that no one has done. That's a really good, so if someone's watching this, if that's a great master's thesis right there, looking at the relationship between GPA and semester affiliation, we probably have that info somewhere that we could mine. So
yeah, that's the thesis. That's the one. Now, a lot of people in the industry, there's a lot of talk about expected increases in alcohol abuse and hazing behaviors as we shift from this virtual environment that we've been in for the last 12, 13 months to in-person events that are coming up this fall. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on what we're going to be facing in the fall?
Pietro, you want to start?
We actually have an article coming out about this in Inside Higher Ed as a shameless plug, I think, in the next couple weeks. And so in this article, we talk about what we predict will happen. And we have some focus group data and from our concept teams that to say that I think campus-based full-time staff are really worried about this. It's an area of concern. And so we talk about this idea of compression, right? So you have 2 cycles of students who joined that may or may not have felt that they have the undergraduate experience, right? And so regardless if they are fraternity sorority members or not, right, I think there will be spillover, right, or carryover into the Greek experience. So I think this will be a campus-wide experience, but I think there will be carryover too. Yeah.
I think I was talking to someone today, actually it was Dr. Kilmer, that was talking about that someone had mentioned to him that when students return, only the seniors will have been on campus. And so just that thought, that feeling of, right, it's a lot of new folks in the campus experience. What do I do? How do I navigate this? And a lot of, again, the worry and concern is making up for lost time in what those stories are. So, or we haven't had these connections and these relationships to enact a lot of our prevention efforts and the like. So it's going to be interesting. I think there's some mixed things in terms of what that's going to look like, but we hope for the best. But ideally, we're going to launch some studies that will really help figure out a better way to approach our work, right? And hopefully providing some resources for our professionals in that regard.
Yeah, you're so right. I was talking to Hank Newer earlier today. He's going to be speaking at UT Austin later tonight on hazing prevention. And that was the exact focus, is that we haven't spoken about hazing prevention to, multiple generations of students who haven't even been on campus. And so we have to kind of double up our work in terms of education and prevention because of the sheer number of students that haven't heard the message yet, who haven't been on campus. So something to think about, certainly. The last thing I wanted to talk about too is Gen Z. And it's something that I talk about often, probably because I have 2 Gen Z children. I have a freshman in high school daughter, a sophomore son in high school, who hopefully are going to be heading to Penn State in the next couple of years. And the trends that I'm seeing, and I'm thinking that you're seeing the same thing, is that the reasons for joining a fraternity or sorority is different today than it was in prior generations. Can you tell us a little bit about what your research is showing?
Yeah, and so from our fraternity sorority experience survey, definitely shifts. Prior friendship, consistently was in the top, like 78% saying friendship is the number one. And as Generation Z, and I'm reading this to make sure I get it correct here, becomes more involved, second and third reasons for joining are really kind of moving around as well. So friendship is still a classic, right? But we're looking at it moving, setting social opportunities, leadership development, and career networking for fraternities. Sororities are talking about philanthropy, community service, and a home away from home. So those are new, and I would say what has been a classic, approach to it, it's definitely moving and shifting there. So.
Well, that's good information for all the fraternity and sorority students that are listening right now. Start thinking about your recruitment and how you're marketing this thing, because things are shifting and you need to be aware of the shift if you want to attract students into your organization. Extremely important. This has been really wonderful. Is there any other future projects or collaborations that you're thinking about for the Piazza Center now?
Well, as we already talked about, Michael, there's an idea of the week that seems to pop up at a new research project. I would say the latest one, and Dr. Sasso and I just did a concept meeting with some executives from our historically Jewish fraternities and sororities about, as again, anti-Semitism, and or how campuses are not connecting our Jewish organizations to the DEI conversation. And there's been an Inside Higher Ed article earlier in the spring that talks about that as well, a bit in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism, or at least the thought of it, and connecting it to some of our other DEI work. But this is within our own interfraternity communities or Hellenic communities that has been happening for literally years and years, that it's kind of an untouched topic. So we're really excited about that. We have representatives from Hillel as part of that conversation, as well, like I said, as well as execs. Just a beginning conversation. Pietro already kind of talked about some of the hazing work that we're doing. We got some partnerships with the University of Tennessee, University of Georgia, Cal Poly, UVA. And so a lot of great relationships cooking. I would say the other study that is not a part of that is Dr. Eric Norman, Vice President of Student Affairs at Austin Pay. And I just met about some work around community engagement and looking about really how our organizations are or are not vehicles to exercise students' moral imagination for the public good. And looking at developing, again, a concept team with that, with a wide span of higher ed leaders and leaders in the philanthropy world to really look critically about, are these organizations those vehicles? Is a lot of our mission statements would suggest that we are, but have we resourced that conversation? And so really excited about that. Dr. Norman's excited about that. And also Spencer Long within Sigma Alpha Epsilon. We've been having a lot of great conversations, how it connects to voting, how it connects to civic engagement, political engagement, and looking at potentially what our organizations already potentially do well, or could be enhanced. And what are those pathways for professionals again, centering this back on professionals. How do we do our best work in that space? And then one more, if I can, and there's many more, as Pietro talked about, our ritual education program. We're talking about, I'm doing a little matchmaking right now of finding a research faculty to investigate where chapters really respect the ritual and positive chapter outcomes in individual student character development, as well as grades, service hours, philanthropy dollars, that kind of thing, as well as a primer for ritual education. And then the last one, if I may, is working with our Penn State prevention science folks from Health and Human Development and Biobehavioral Health on a compassion-based mindfulness program as a primer, so that students understand how they show up in stressful situations, so they can ground themselves to make better decisions in critical moments, such as life-saving or life-threatening moments. So just a few things going on.
I mean, more than a few. This is some juicy stuff. I'm going to send my resume over to you now. I want to start working on this.
All right. Cool. Yes. Well, actually, we're hiring a data analyst position right now. So
there you go. Hey, listen, if there's any data analysts out there that are looking for meaningful work within fraternity and sorority life, I can think of no better opportunity than the Piazza Center. I'll tell you that straight. So that is absolutely wonderful. All right. Well, listen, as you know, we do love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast, and our speakers are always working with the chapters at Penn State. As a matter of fact, Dr. Thea Zunick is working tonight with ZTA at Penn State. So we need to know, if we're speaking at Penn State, where should we go to get some great local food?
All right. So Maine and Barry, and gosh, I don't know that. Actually, it's a Maine, Bay, and Barry. And the guy goes out to Maine once a week and drives back to State College with his fresh catch. And so fresh seafood, great clam chowder. And yeah, so Maine, Bay, and Barry. And it's also, the bar downstairs is called Voodoo. Upstairs is the Maine and Barry. And so you get a good combination there. So.
That sounds absolutely delicious. And living here in Tennessee, you know, landlocked, I'm also always looking for seafood that's fresh, and it's very difficult to find, I will tell you.
Crab cakes are amazing. So.
Well, that's awesome. All right, very good. So if our listeners want to learn more about the Piazza Center, where should they go online to get some more information?
Yes, Piazza Center at psu.edu is our good old website, and everything is up there. Research agenda is up there. Scholar applications are up there. And Dr. Sasso's bio and some of the good work that we're doing. So yeah, it's all up there for public view. So
fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Veldkamp. Thank you so much, Dr. Sasso. We appreciate all the information. This has been fantastic, and we look forward to seeing all the good work that you do. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks all.
All right. Take care.